Hello there to all you nice people, and welcome to something new on my channel, a book review. This is a non-fiction work. It's not a game, it's not fiction, fluff for any setting. It's kind of a documentary book. It's called Of Dice and Men, subtitled The Story of Dungeons & Dragons and the People Who Play It, by David M. Ewalt, who is a journalist and a role-playing gamer. It's approximately 250 pages, and the cost, well, I suppose that varies quite a lot depending on where you get it from. You can look that up yourself. Now, if we start with the cover here, we have the title and we have a 12-sided die. So this is a role-playing, or at least somehow gaming related book, right? And it has here, it says The Story of Dungeons and Dragons. So you'd expect it to be a history of role-playing games, specifically D&D. And it is, but you have to be aware that this is not a book written for us. It's not a book for gamers. It's not for people who already know everything about role-playing games. And the author states this very clearly in the introduction. I've seen other reviews of this book that somehow missed this and became very disappointed at what they found in the book. But I have to say, the author is honest up front about his intentions, about what he's going to provide. What this is a book to introduce the concept of role-playing games to outsiders. And the way Ewalt decides to do this is a sort of two-pronged attack. He has two different kinds of chapters in the book, and he interleaves them with each other. One type of chapter is the historical. There are a couple of early chapters about the history of, tabletop games as a pastime in general, all the way from early chess-like games up to modern-day war games, and how D&D developed out of that. And there's also a bit of a history about the development and early history of D&D as a game and of TSR specifically as a company and the main people involved with that, going up to about the time when TSR folded and was bought up by Wizards of the Coast. After that, the history becomes very more of a sketch than anything else. But yeah, there's very little information here that you didn't already know. I mean, if you're into role-playing games and you've studied the history of them, you would be familiar with all this information already. Or if you're not, then you might be disappointed that it's so narrowly focused on only one company and one game, and you want to know about the rest. Well, there are other books that cover this, and you have to consider that this is a pretty thin book after all. It's not a big, and it's not all history. The history is about half the pages. The other half is his kind of autobiography as a gamer, partly about his history in childhood, but mostly about how he reconnected with the hobby as an adult. And he's using his own personal experience as sort of a window into the hobby. And here again, you could be disappointed in that the lack of completeness. He doesn't cover the entire range of possible games. For instance, he has a chapter where he goes LARPing, and that is only a single, very specific type of LARP that he goes to, that I don't think is representative of that sub-hobby as a whole. But he doesn't claim it is. It's just to give examples. It's to give a little bit of insight to newbies. And as such, I think it works. I think this is a book you could put in the hands of a friend or relative who is curious about role-playing games, doesn't quite know what to make of it, wants more than, a 5-minute explanation, and has the capacity to read a 250-page book. And, wants to learn more. It's also kind of interesting, I suppose, for a gamer looking at it as just one of our tribe and his perspective on things. You know, there's bits and pieces there that are helpful. I mean, he interviews a few old timers, people who were around back in the day, and well, or at least in some cases plays in their games with people who were around back in the 70s and as dungeon masters, and with very varying results. And that's kind of interesting to see how different people in those examples where it's not just him and his normal circle of friends, you get a bit more variety in types of games that are being run, and that's interesting. But mainly, as I said, this is a book for the newcomer to role-playing games. And that is also why he focuses on just one game, because Dungeons & Dragons is the game that most people have heard of outside the hobby, and it's still the biggest. I wanted to comment about the title. This is, of course, a pun on, or a play on words on, Of Mice and Men. I couldn't really find any similarities between this book and the John Steinbeck novel. There's no dumb guy who commits murder, for example. But if you think of where that title originally came from, it's a quote from a poem, Ode to a Mouse, where the original line is, "The best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley," meaning that whatever you plan, you know, things seldom go according to plan. Things often go wrong. And, you know, that could stand as an epitaph for the history of TSR, especially as a company, where things did not exactly go as envisioned. And it's also sort of a quote that's good to remember as a role-playing gamer, because things seldom follow the expected path in a role-playing adventure, unless your game master is heavily railroading you, of course. And yeah, so the title is somewhat apropos, even though he doesn't explicitly make these connections anywhere. He just stuck the title on there, and if you can figure it out for yourself, well, that's nice. So that concludes this review. I won't be doing these kind of things often, but I do have I have a couple of other nonfiction books lined up that I might talk about sometime in the future, but they are all much bigger. They're examples of the kinds of history of gaming that gamers want, as opposed to this book. And they will take quite a lot longer to read through. But anyway, please comment what you thought about this sort of review. Do you want to see more of them? Did you like it? Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't. And until next video, this is Dr. Jan, signing off.